Welcome to the Hard Skills Show with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and today's guest is Dr. Alexis Francis. And we'll be talking about when authenticity matters and how to use it to cultivate your career with her. So great to have you on the show, Alexis.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on this show, we discuss how to develop the nuanced hard skills needed to drive significant systemic change to make a real impact through your leadership. So be ready, take notes. I always do. Reflect deeply, especially with Alexis here. She's going to have you reflecting deeply, I promise, and identify at least one small step to further develop your hard skills muscle. Now, a little bit about our guest today. Dr. Francis is the department chair and an associate professor for the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Elon University, and a licensed psychology with a small private practice. With academic training in not one, but two PhDs in sociology and psychology from Duke University, her teaching and research interests are at the intersection of these fields, and her main area of expertise is within issues of self, identity, and well-being, with a special interest in authenticity. Her work has been published in a variety of journals and books that span the breadth of her scholarly interests, and she loves debating the ethics of authenticity, tries to incorporate her knowledge into her own approach and adventures. So this is going to be good. This is going to be good. Alexis, let's start with like just a fun icebreaker kind of question. When was the first time you felt the experience or thrill of authenticity for yourself?
Okay, so I started thinking about authenticity like many other people in middle school. And looking back, this isn't really surprising because there's a developmental psychologist, Susan Harder, who identified that around age 11 is when we start thinking about the idea of a true self and realizing that there might be true self and false self behavior, that some choices feel more like me and less like me. And so I remembered being in middle school, and there's lots of mean things that kids say to each other in middle school. And one mean thing that I was hearing really stood out to me, and it was when people would call others posers. I don't know if you remember that term.
Yes.
That just felt like the absolute worst possible insult to me because it says you are not who you claim to be. And so I remember as a middle schooler thinking, oof, whatever I am, I'll be anything, but I don't want to be that. And then realizing that that was going to be very hard work to not try to be something I wasn't and to figure out who I actually was. And I'm still working on that now in my mid-40s.
Totally. I was just talking to my spouse the other day about how we learn all of these messages early on, and it takes decades to unlearn what doesn't apply actually to us, right? And the experience, especially for women and marginalized people, underserved, underrepresented people, is even more so because there's a complexity of messages that happen for them, and that it's so hard to unlearn those messages because you believe them, right? I mean, they're all around us. So if being called a poser is being called non-authentic, right? Then how do you define authenticity?
Great question. So, my definition of authenticity has evolved over the years, but when I started studying it in graduate school, I was thinking about it as behavior that is in alignment with the true self. And the question of true self is this dicey, deep, complicated philosophical question. And over the years, I've tried to actually sidestep that question and not get kind of pulled into, is there a true self? You know, there are spiritual religious beliefs about that. There are cultural beliefs about that. There's so many different frameworks to the question of whether or not there's a true self. But for me, authenticity is acting in a way, behaving in a way that matches what I really believe, what my values are.
Interesting. Yeah. That makes sense. And so, um, how do we know? How do we know
Right.
that?
Yeah. Uh, that's a good question too, because it ties back to why the term poser bothered me so much. It bothered me so much because it was other people coming and saying, and like you pointed out, voices of authority and often privileged folks coming in and saying, you're not who you say you are. But I've always believed that authenticity is fully subjective. I do not think it is something that other people can come in and tell us whether we are authentic or not. I think it is something we know within ourselves and can only assess within ourselves because we know our values and what is real for us.
I really appreciate that. So, this is reminding me of situations when you feel like you are behaving as your true self, and someone, even as adults, calls you um, out on doing something the opposite of what's meaningful to you. You know, like you, let's say you usually approach everything with kindness and compassion and thoughtfulness, and someone says to you, you were acting like a complete jerk, and you are um, a selfish person, which is like the opposite of how you see yourself. How do you think about that reconciling between how you come off to other people, or a specific individual, how you see yourself, and the tension that's created?
I do think we can all engage in a fair amount of self-deception. And sometimes when people call us out in those ways, they might be right. Like, I think sometimes that can be an opportunity to look inward and think about why somebody might see that discrepancy and consider if that discrepancy was actually intentional for us. Okay, is there an aspirational version of myself I was leaning into, or a way I want to move this company or this project in making that choice? Or, oops, did I get off path for who I am? So I think instead of a defensiveness to that claim from somebody else, I think it really is an opportunity to check in about, am I walking the road that I want to walk? Is this the way I want to handle things?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. Like, our first reaction is to be extraordinarily defensive, right? Like, that's not me. How dare they? They're the one with the problem, et cetera, et cetera. And that might be, but first we need to take a pause. And the more you know yourself well enough, and like, what are my most consistent actions? What do people say about me most often? Have I gotten feedback about this? Have I explored this with others who know me really well and who have seen my behaviors on a consistent basis? It does help us fine tune when necessary, or to say, I'm going to let this go because this is about that person. It's not about me.
Absolutely. And within that, knowing oneself is not this task that we could check off our to-do list. We are all dynamic. We are all hopefully changing, growing, evolving. And so knowing if I might have known myself 5 years ago, but that doesn't actually mean I know myself now. So there's this constant need for this self-audit of just tuning into yourself and checking in with yourself. What do I want right now? What matters to me? What's my purpose right now? What is motivating me right now? And honestly seeing that. And sometimes our motivations are just lovely ones that we would we would want to post on social media. And sometimes our motivations are things that aren't as comfortable to say out loud socially. Like, for example, somebody might have financial motivations for a certain move or a project. But checking in with yourself about where you are really at and if the ways you're acting match your values, I think is an ongoing task across the life course.
Yeah, for sure. And what comes up for me, I don't know if you've done some research on this or not, but what comes up for me when you're sort of sharing the reality that self-awareness is a dynamic thing that changes over time, right? Who we are, and what we value changes over time depending on context and, changes to our lives. But from the perspective of others, people find comfort and solace when they put us in a box and keep us there. Like, because, once they see us in one way, they sort of made their assessment, they've made their judgment. And then when you act differently from that, it can be jarring for some people. And it could be even things like, we have a set of friends in high school. Over time, we all grow in different ways. People still remember you from how you were in high school and try to keep you in the box of, but in high school, she was like this, right? Well, 20 years later, you're not going to be, most of us are not going to be quite like we were in high school. Some of us will, okay, but not all of us. So I'm saying all of that to wonder about, like, what are your thoughts, or have you done any research around this juxtaposition or difference between how people want to keep us stable and get upset if we act differently versus our own growth change process that allows us to grow and adjust over time?
Yeah. So I haven't done any research work on that topic, but from, a decade plus of clinical experience, I've worked with people around this issue. And I think that sometimes it's necessary that we announce our changes, that we actually give voice to that, to reflect. So I've operated in this way, and I realize you're very used to me operating in this way, and I'm actually going to do something different. I actually sent letters to a few people in my life telling them that I was taking a vacation from certain ways of being in 2024 and trying something new, because I've operated in some ways that I want to do a little bit different, a little bit better, and orienting people to those changes, because we can't blame people for getting used to the ways we are. We train people about how we are, who we are, how we act, what they can expect from us. And if we are changing the playbook of that, it's reasonable to alert people to those changes. And of course, it will vary how much backstory we want to give somebody, depending on the nature of the relationship, about the reason for those changes, or, the context for that in a deeper way. But I think announcing it is important so that people can join us in this new version of who we want to be.
I absolutely love that. And the reason I love that is that it has such application to coaching as well, right? You do that with your therapy clients. I do that often with my coaching clients. And the way that we think about this is, if you're going to coaching, there's a reason for it. And that reason is, I would like to develop myself as a leader, and that causes change. And every time you change something in an organizational system, people react to it, and not always in a positive way. And they want to put you back in the box, right? And so one of the sort of ways to think about that, and this is part of stakeholder-centered coaching, which is developed by Marshall Goldsmith, is he says, bring in the stakeholders that you most care about, like how they see you, and start letting them know through a feed forward instead of a feedback mechanism. Hey, I want you to start expecting me to make some adjustments in this area. Give me feedback about how you see I'm doing. I'd like you to sort of catch me when I'm doing it well. Let me know when I'm not. Give me some feedback. And that way, like, people join you in the change process instead of just constantly sort of catching you just doing the same old thing and wanting you to sort of see the old patterns again. So love that. When we are reaching an ad break, let's take a pause here. When we come back, I want to sort of explore how you're sort of applying this in the travel and tourism industry, especially Disney. That is so fascinating to me. So you are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Alexis Francis. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to join our audience online and ask questions, you can always join us on LinkedIn or YouTube or talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Alexis Franzese. We just got done talking a little bit about how to sort of navigate understanding authenticity, applying it to our lives, the dynamic nature of it, how to sort of think about when others want to keep seeing us in kind of our old ways after we've already sort of embarked on a growth or change process. Now I'm totally switching gears. I'm super curious about how you're exploring authenticity and identity within the context of travel and tourism. How did that come to be? Why the special interest in Disney? This is just super interesting.
Okay. So when I started out studying authenticity in early 2000s, it was, how one thinks about themselves, also how we interact with others. But over the years, I've noticed the term authentic used to advertise products and consumer goods. And then in about I'd say the last 10 years, was noticing travel experiences that were being advertised as authentic Ireland, or travel companies that were promising people these more genuine experiences. And I was curious about what that meant. Started to think about places that I enjoyed traveling to, bringing multiple worlds together. I also study happiness and teach a class called The Science of Happiness, and teach a class beyond that called Happiest Place, The Science of Happiness at Disney. And so in looking around Disney does the most authentic simulation possible. Main Street USA is the Main Street that we all wish existed. I remember reading about city planners that were visiting Main Street USA of Disney in order to plan actual cities. So they were looking at the simulated in order to make the authentic. And so these ideas of authenticity and simulation, and that dialectic between authenticity and simulation at Disney, is just fascinating to me. And so I'm actually working with a colleague at Guilford right now on a book about Disney, and how, and authenticity and simulation is one of the themes within the book, and how they bring that together.
Yeah, and people are obsessed with Disney. I mean, Disney fanatics are really into Disney. So what is it that they do that feels authentic, even if it's simulated?
There is so much that Disney does. And I know this is authentic leadership, so I'll try to move through this quickly. But I mean, through all the sensory experiences that they do, through the smells that they pump into the air, the music that they play, the visual sights, their ability to invoke feelings of nostalgia, that people will go to Disney and feel nostalgic for places they've never been and for places that don't even actually exist. They just, through this multi-sensory approach and this experiential approach, invite people to feeling that they belong there. And that they have and I think in the individual's experience, that they are authentically part of that experience that Disney is offering them.
So interesting. I'm going to ask a question that might anger Disney enthusiasts. When you're describing this, I am thinking about at what point do we worry about manipulation, right? Manipulating people's feelings and experiences. Now, it's one thing for something like Disney because they're creating an experience for you, and that I have sort of less concern about, as long as you're feeling like a positive experience, when you've left and you want to come back. But again, if I'm going to sort of like connect it back to leadership, one might take what you said and say, oh, all I need to do is simulate authenticity and I can get people to do what I want, or get people to feel good. Get people to lean into my influence of where I want them to go as a leader, right? I know that's not the message you're sending. So like, how do we reconcile that?
I love that you pulled that out of our conversation about Disney, because that is such an ongoing conversation within the authentic leadership literature. There's so much debate within that literature about the value, essentially the value of the concept overall. And to some degree, I think it was a 2021 piece that was in Leadership Quarterly, whether or not authenticity and leadership are actually compatible concepts, given that authenticity is so incredibly self-referential and leadership is so relational. If we look back at the roots of authenticity, there are distinctions made between authenticity and sincerity. And sincerity being kind of this relational interactive piece, whereas authenticity is fully self-referential. And so the question of authentic leadership and manipulation, I think, is a real one. I would argue that people recognize performed authenticity. I think we see it and we feel it. I'm trying to hold all the things I've said earlier as true too, that I believe authenticity is subjective and that other people can't tell us when we're being. But I think there is an experience when we're with somebody who has a genuineness to them, that we feel that and recognize that. Looking back to some of my earlier research on authenticity, I examined the reasons that people would engage in inauthentic behavior. And I found a few different reasons. I found that some people would engage in inauthentic behavior in order to keep the social cohesion of the group, to keep things rolling along, to keep everything pleasant. And other people would engage in inauthenticity for instrumental self-gain. And when I started out studying authenticity, I was very critical of this. Actually, looking back at some of the earlier things I wrote about it, I called this like inauthenticity to manipulate others. And then over the years, I've evolved to see that as a bit more strategic. So there's lots of motivations for why people do the things the way they do. I still am a big proponent of authenticity, but always in pro-social ways. I would not want to see a leader be authentic and holding authenticity on such a pedestal that they act in ways that oppress others or anything of that nature.
Yeah. So this comes up often in my coaching and my leadership academy, in group coaching, is the sort of tension around, I want to be myself in all spaces.
Mm-hmm.
That's authenticity for self, right? For self-preservation reasons.
Right.
I want to be able to be myself and not be judged negatively for being that. And this often also comes up for women and marginalized leaders, especially who are constantly judged for being themselves, right? And at the same time, you do, as a leader, need to be there for others. Like you were saying, there's a position of understanding and meeting other people where they are and supporting others and creating a thriving environment. There are times when there's a clash between those two. And I'm sort of curious, like, what do you think about that clash between authentic self and authentic leadership as a concept? And what, you know, like, what do we do about that?
Such a big question. We do know across studies, my own included, that inauthenticity is associated with symptoms of depression and symptoms of anxiety. So I think it is a task that individuals have to find and or create environments in their workplace where they can lead in ways that they can be authentic. There are costs to that inauthenticity, but finding the right place or creating the place where people can behave in ways that feel authentic for them.
Yeah, I don't know how you just pulled together all of this in just one sentence, but I think that is right on. A lot of the work that that I do is focused on, is this the right space and place for you to be your best self? And are you able to carve that out? And can you then help others as you create your own sort of way of leading and thinking about that as an authentic leader, offer that to others as well, right? That is not an easy thing to do. And sometimes there is kind of another piece to this that I want to sort of come back to after the break, which is there is a difference between who we are as leaders and you know, our authentic selves, and just being effective communicators and effective interpersonally. And you can develop some skills that don't change who you are. So I'm sort of just curious about that when we come back. Again, reminder, we're reaching an ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mara Branco, and our guest today, Dr. Alexis Francis, who is talking about authentic leadership. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Alexis Franzese. We were just talking about trying to separate out authenticity in terms of how we see ourselves, just for ourselves. Authenticity as a leader, where we're leading other people in how they view us, and how to sort of not do it performatively. And I was sort of just moving into wondering what happens for leaders who are having difficulty understanding the difference or knowing the difference between showing up as their authentic selves so that they can be their best self, and when they're just being ineffective in their communication or their navigation of complex systems, or things like that. How do you think about that? How do you sort of help people navigate and tease apart the difference?
I think that there's a bit of a misconception that authenticity means just speaking your mind and saying everything that's going on and being boundaryless. And if you walk into a meeting late, announcing it's because you decided that getting a coffee was more important, and here you are, and oh, there was a line dropping your kids off. But I don't think that's what authenticity is. Again, I think going back to this idea of behavior that is in alignment with values is the check. And so when somebody's in an organizational setting, they have their own personal values for their content, for the process of how they do their work. And then there's also values related to how they lead. So there's that self, like back to that self piece and that leadership piece. And I think just being aware of the values at all times, both the values one holds for themselves and the values one holds for the organization, and how they want to relate to people and how they want to lead people, is the big work of bringing authenticity into the workplace.
I really appreciate that. I'm thinking about like several leaders who that is exactly their challenge, is saying, if I can't speak my mind, then you're not letting me be authentic. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that there's a difference between being transparent and boundaryless. I think that there's appropriate filtering and presentation of self in the workplace that can still be values aligned and utterly authentic for leaders. And in some ways, I think that's why there's criticism that the authentic leadership approach has actually damaged some people in the workplace. Because if people read that literature and they think, oh, this just means that I should bring everything to the table and just let it all hang out. Absolutely not. It just means this constant work of engaging in the audit of whether or not your behavior matches your values and if you're in alignment. I do think there is great value to transparency within the relationships, because that does breed trust in a workplace. And that is the value of a leader having a degree of authenticity, because it facilitates trust with the people that they are serving. When they feel like, okay, this individual is going to tell me what they really think, they have values in mind, and to the degree which the greater the degree to which that leader can be clear about those values, I think also serves the organization.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a couple of things here. One is you're just sort of clarifying the difference between being transparent for the purpose of helping people understand why you're choosing to do the things you do as a leader, what the purpose of your behaviors are, connecting those to the values that you have, versus the lack of boundaries, lack of filter, sharing all, can sometimes hurt people. I mean, you think about children, right, who are lack of filter, boundaryless, and they'll say like, you're ugly, and I don't like your, your nose, and like completely lack of filter. And we do teach children to think about, like, we don't want to necessarily teach them to lie, but we also want to help them understand that people have feelings, and people are hurt when you just point out all of their flaws, and especially when it's not in the service to them. And if you're in a leadership role, most of your job is not to be in service to yourself, it's to be in service to others and the organization. And that means trying to find that balance of what can help serve me be my very best for other people, and then what do other people need from me in order for them to be their very best. And that often means finding that fine line. It's not easy. These are nuanced hard skills, people. That's why this show is called The Hard Skills, okay? They're very nuanced hard skills, but finding that fine line is important. So you mentioned an audit several times. Tell us about how can people kind of do this life or career audit around their authenticity? How does that strategically, how can that strategically guide their career and their leadership?
As a therapist, I believe that the best place, or the easiest place to do this work is probably within the setting of therapy or coaching. Either, if somebody also has concerns or going through life transitions that justify therapy as compared to coaching, because obviously there's different orientations to those. But with somebody who is trained and skilled in this and can be a safe place to invite the person to really dig in. Because when we do these audits, there are sometimes dark corners and things that we might want to see. And the work of recognizing that you're out of alignment, there can be grief associated with that work. To have walked a path for a really long time and realize that you have to make a pivot. There can be grief associated with that. And so, the dialectic of acceptance and change that comes from dialectical behavior therapy is really useful here too. Kind of helping somebody to think through, here's where I am, this is the reality of the situation, and here are the things that I'm going to need to modify for my next chapter. So I do think audits are necessary, but I also think we can do them alone. Like, I think these audits can happen in therapy. I think these audits can happen sitting on the beach with no phone in your hand, with no book in your hand. Just thinking about, where is my life at? Do I like where I'm at? Am I living in a way that reflects my values? And I know I sound like a broken record about the term values today. And that is because I believe that values are at the heart of authenticity. I said before that I don't get pulled into the dialogue about whether or not there's a true self, but if I were to get pulled in, it would go back to values for me. And so when I say audit, I'm really referring to just taking the time, and this isn't just a one and done, as I talked about before, people are dynamic, authenticity changes, to check in with oneself, figure out what actually matters to you, if you have a sense of purpose, which, as somebody who teaches a class on the science of happiness, if I can give any recommendation to people from what I've learned from that field, it's about having a sense of purpose. And the beauty of purpose is that we can have purpose in so many different types of jobs. We don't have to be CEOs or C-level to have purpose. People have purpose at all different levels and all types of different career paths. And that the benefits for our health and well-being of having purpose are great. So I think authenticity and purpose and values are all tied together, because we are going to thrive. We are going to be more successful. We are going to be respected by our peers when we're acting in these values aligned way and in a purpose driven way.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that you mentioned, like, you don't have to be in a leadership role to achieve this, right? And I think about this a lot, that sometimes it's useful for leaders to separate themselves from their title and position and just think about what's important to them and how can they bring their best selves to any work, because you can be a leader in any situation. You can practice leadership in any situation. And frankly, you are more likely to be influential and more likely to make a difference and make a greater impact when you're thinking about that piece than when you're thinking about, I'm in this leadership role and nobody's listening to me. You know, that's about you assuming that people will automatically listen to you just because you're in a specific position of authority. But these days, it's not enough just to like sit in a chair and own the position. It really takes a lot more skill. And if you can sort of master that skill, regardless of what position you're in, you are much more likely to be, number one, successful. Number two, achieve higher levels of success. And it could be in higher level leadership roles or otherwise. And number three, this happiness piece that you look into, right? So, excuse me. So for example, if I understand where I can put my greatest energy into a path that makes me feel really great, that makes other people feel great, where I can really make a difference, and just focus on that, right? Just focus on where my feet are walking and just keep walking in that direction. And then share that with other people. It is much more likely that people are going to lean in and say, can I learn how to do that? Can I support you in that way? Can I, because there's a gravitational pull, right, to that. What are your thoughts on that?
I love what you just articulated and the idea that you could enact leadership even if you don't already have the authority position to begin with. And I think people feel that gravitational pull because that feels authentic, because it's thought out and it's purposeful and it's values aligned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're reaching another ad break. And when we come back, I want to explore just a couple of final things. If we wanted, as individuals, anybody who's listening to this, do that audit for ourselves, just to see where it goes. What would we do? What would be the steps? And especially, what would leaders do in their roles? Where do they start if they're already feeling a tension? So once we come back from this ad break, we'll explore that a little bit. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest, Dr. Alexis Francis, and we'll be right back. Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Alexis Francis, who is a sociologist and psychologist who studies authenticity and identity and the science of happiness. So we were just talking about how to do an authenticity audit, a career audit focused on, are we being our authentic selves? How do we sort of strategically think about mapping out our careers, our whether it's leadership or not, using this concept or framework? How would I start? If I was somebody coming to you, sort of, let's start with this. What are the signs first that I would know something's wrong? And I'll give one example. Very recently, I was talking with somebody who moved out of a very high level leadership role. Actually, she was the CEO of a company, and she started doing consulting, making great money, on paper, highly successful, really impressive. Like, I looked at her and I was like, oh my God, just inspiring, impressive. And I sort of made a passing comment about, sometimes we feel like we're doing the right things, but we feel trapped. And she immediately sort of held on to that. And she said, tell me more, because I feel like maybe that's where I'm at and I didn't realize it. So that's one sign to me, right? If you feel trapped, there's something up. Something is feeling off between where you want to be, what makes you happy, and what you're actually doing. That's one sign. I'm wondering, like, are there other signs when people come to you for therapy? What are they saying? Because I'm sure they're not like saying, I feel like I'm not being my authentic self. Right? So what are they actually
Always.
What are they actually saying?
So it's a bit of a complicated question, because I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome. That term was coined by Clance and Imes back in the 70s for female graduate students who felt like they were faking it. And so there's a degree to which there are going to, in life, sometimes be imposter feelings because of internalized messages about who deserves a place at the table. And I want to be really careful to distinguish that, which has a different therapeutic work demand. The work demand around that is helping the person to recognize that, A, everyone thinks they're an imposter, even the ones who aren't saying it. Let them figure out coping mechanisms to help deal with that feeling. But that is different from what you just described for the colleague you interacted with, where it was something beyond that. It wasn't, I'm an imposter, I don't deserve to be here. It was, something's not right. The things that I listen for, when we are working hard for things that are values aligned, where I think we're being our authentic selves, we're working hard, but we're not exhausted. Exhaustion to me means something else. We could be kind of fatigued by, oh, that was a big week. Like, I did so much, my body needs to rest, but my mind is on fire because this is exciting. But I think that, like, exhaustion of where you just can't wait to check out, where you don't feel excited or energized, that is really, really meaningful. And over the years, clinically, I've worked with people who come to me with some fatigue around the work, and we can kind of clean things up, and they come to realize that they actually do love their work, and then that energy comes back. So things that catch my attention, I think when people say that they're really, really exhausted, is a first clue to me.
Oh, that's a really great one. I realized that in my first career, where I was maybe working 35 hours a week. I had the summers off. I had, I came home early, I worked for education, and I thought, this makes sense to me pragmatically, but I was coming home exhausted and feeling terrible. And now I have, 10 jobs, and I, work like, 80 hours. I don't know. But a lot of energy, because it's all aligned with the things that I love doing and with kind of a sense of purpose. So I'm resonating personally, but also that makes a lot of sense. Can you speak, before we get into sort of the audit piece, can you speak a little bit more about that authenticity as you didn't say this exactly, but we've spoken about this as a form of privilege, not everybody having sort of equal access to that?
Yeah, so that's an idea that I started out considering 20 years ago, when I really was early in my graduate school days, about how we vary in the degree to which we need social approval because of social structural forces. So we do not all have equal access to saying what's on our mind. When we walk into spaces, our physical embodiment determines how people interact with us. And so starting at this work decades ago, I was tuned into the idea that as we age, we might have more freedom to be authentic. Depending on our racial and ethnic identities, we might have more freedom to be authentic. A variety of gender identities, sexual identities, how these influence the degree to which we can be who we are. And so I think as leaders, being tuned into the ways that the people you serve may have historically had greater access to that privilege or not, and creating spaces where people have room to be who they are, not in that unfiltered, boundaryless way, but in that really lovely, I am valued here. I know you had an episode a few weeks back about sense of belonging, which I thought was fabulous. And I think as leaders, we have an obligation to create settings and experiences in which people experience belonging, because that is a precursor to people being authentic. We will not bring our authentic selves to work if we don't feel like there's a possibility we can belong in that place.
I love that. And I'm glad that we were able to sort of squeeze that in. So once you think about doing an audit, the first thing is to assess how you feel. Do you feel, a sense of exhaustion? Do you feel trapped? And also assess, like, what is this environment causing me to experience? Is there sort of issues around access and privilege that is sort of stealing away from my ability to lean into this? So once you've sort of assessed that, what might be like the first step that people might take to do that kind of life or career audit that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I'm going to give 2 steps
All right.
because I think they go hand in hand. I think that noticing the micro moments when we feel that we were authentic or inauthentic, like actually, honestly, openly letting ourselves recognize that felt right. Ooh, that felt like me. That felt good. Or yikes, I didn't like the way that felt. And I think life has so many demands, and we move so fast that we miss those micro moments. We just do the work and do the job and get it done. But I think slowing it down, and in both directions, to notice, ooh, that felt aligned. That felt off. And then the step after that, I think, is experimenting with doing a little bit of a manual override. In those moments when it felt off, can we go back and repair that a little? Or can we commit in that moment to putting our toe in the water of a more authentic action or a more authentic path? And then look at how people respond. How is that received? And taking that data in. across the process, I do think it's valuable to find models too. If there's somebody at the workplace, I like the way that person does that. I feel like I know them. They're a great leader, and I feel like I have a sense of who they are. To kind of see if that person might be available to mentor you, observe that person, find out a little bit more about their story.
Perfect. I love that. And so aligned with kind of how I go about doing coaching as well. I mean, it's rooted in psychology, folks. It's rooted in the hard skills, right, of psychology. Okay. Where you can find Alexis, you can find her on LinkedIn. You can find her at www.authenticaf. It's really about her initials. .me, okay? authenticaf.me. And, check us out. What did you take away from today? More importantly, what's one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Alexis? Share it with us on LinkedIn at Mira Brancu and at Alexis Francis and at talkradio.nyc so we could cheer you on. Talk Radio is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place. In addition, we're on iTunes and Spotify, on Apple Podcasts at least, and Spotify as a podcast. Leave a review, share with others to help increase our visibility, reach, and impact, and follow us. The stuff we talk about on this show is part of our research-based strategic leadership pathway model that we teach in our TowerScope Leadership Academy, a private coaching and learning community for socially conscious leaders in healthcare, academia, tech, and STEM, looking to make a greater impact. So if you're interested in learning more about that, go to www.gotowerscope.com. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, the host of the Hard Skills Show. And thank you for joining us today, Alexis. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you. Bye, everybody.